Alrighty, Mono Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening and shalom. Welcome to another episode of Liberty and Friends. As I just fixed my mic, apologies for that. That should be better sound. Good evening, welcome to another episode of Liberty and Friends here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. This is your evening premiere Sunday night viewing where we wrap up your news week with compelling analysis you'll get nowhere else except here. Here you'll hear the voices that you do not hear on corporate media, the sort of conservative, classically liberal, libertarian, and even anarchist voices. Again, as I said, the voices you do not hear anywhere else except here. With that being said, welcome to it. Remember, we now have a website here on the show. You can find us at www.bigdaddyliberty.com. There, of course, if you scroll to the bottom, you can also find out how you can become a part of the growing number of South Africans who are subscribing 100 Rand a month towards the show. It is those funds that are helping me hire the editor, the writers now, and of course some of the journals, the freelance journals, let me be specific, who'll be helping us put together that almost carte blanche-like show that we're looking to debut here on the show. So the Big Daddy Liberty Show, which you've been used to being on a Wednesday at 7, we're now going to have one or two of those per month as they now take on a more documentary, almost carte blanche type flavor to them. So guys, it is your support that is helping me do that. So do me a strong favor, www.bigdaddyliberty.com, and find a payment method that suits you. 100 Rand a month helps me secure that new show that we're going to debut here on the show. With that being said, good evening, Liberty and Friends, as always. As the name suggests, it's with me, Big Daddy Liberty, Usihle Ngobese, and of course, I'm never alone. We have the Friends panel, a revolving door of voices, opinionistas, intellectual thought leaders, if you will, who run that intellectual gambit that I spoke of conservatives, liberals, classical liberals, libertarians, and of course, anarchists. Now, with that being said, let's introduce this week's Friends panel, pardon me, hailing all the way from Cape Town at the moment. At least that's his new home, as he's with those boys down in CTE, ETM Analytics. I'm talking of Economist, Bheki Mahlobo. There he is on screen. Bheki, good evening.
Good evening, Sihle. It's been a long time, man. I'm glad to be here. I'm actually in Johannesburg, based in the Johannesburg office for ETM. But yeah, still around, and happy to be on the show.
Absolutely, Putwami. Good to have you on. The benefits indeed of that post-spicy cough world, where the world of work can now happen wherever you are. And yeah, welcome to it. Good to have you on the show. Someone who we also have not seen in a while, but she's very popular on the show. Heck, I should probably have a conversation with her about her having her own show here on the BDL show. Interesting conversation that'll be. But Nolu, Maki, there she is on screen. Nolu, all the way in the battle. Good evening, sis.
Good evening, Sihle. I must say also it's been a while. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to the chat. Oh, sorry, to the show.
Absolutely. Good to have you on the show, Mtagama. With that being said, last but not least, and I say last but not least because my other guest has tendered their apologies. They have a family issue that is, of course, Unzuzo Kati. Homie, we are with you in thought. Shout out to you. But as always, as I like to say on the show, family first. But last but not least, one of the more interesting, deep thinkers who you'll find over at the Institute of Race Relations. He is the deputy deputy head of policy. There he is, Martin from Staden.
Hey, Sigle. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be back. And yeah, it's the deputy head of policy research. Recently started there in the beginning of this month, so it's very exciting. Yeah.
Absolutely. As I've always said, the IRR richer for having you in that organization. Speaking about the IRR, make sure you find their content quality stuff via the Daily Friend. You'll find them at www.dailyfriend.co.za. They come to you Monday to Thursdays live at 1:30, helping you end your news day. That's the Daily Friend at www.dailyfriend.co.za. Guys, with that being said, let's get straight into tonight's conversation because it's got a jam-packed show. It's been a relatively busy week. In fact, if you're in Gauteng right now, at some stage, the U.S. Embassy had you thinking you're going to be dodging bombs or an active shooter in that part of the world, only to find, heck, the crime in South Africa makes up for terrorism in any event. So maybe you were dodging bombs like ATM bombs or bullets by way of our crazy criminals in this country. We'll get to that a little later. Let me begin here, perhaps, at the top. Remember, a lot of these stories, dear viewer, that you're watching me unpack here on the Sunday evenings, Liberty and Friends, are topics I would have covered during the week on my daily show, Vuganazo, that comes to you every morning from 7 a.m. You don't have to be up at 7 a.m. The show is available all day, but we upload it at 7 a.m. Now, with that being said, one of the issues I want to unpack here is the usual red in tooth and claw communist racist in this country who heads up, sadly, the third largest political party in this country. I'm talking, of course, about Julius Malema. Let me just put him on screen briefly because it's a story we covered in the week. As I prepare my notes, bear with me. And maybe as I do that, a reminder to you, dear viewer, that you are a part of the show. So get your comments rolling in thick and fast, and we'll flight them on the screen. Remember also to hit that like button. Now, let me just quickly do this share function. There it is over there. There we go. Yeah, there it is on screen. The headline, which caught my attention, KZN EFF should have responded to the Phoenix vigilante killings with violence. That, of course, is according to the leader of the economic freedom fighter, Julius Malema. Let me quickly read from this piece where economic freedom fighters leader Julius Malema said that members in KwaZulu-Natal should have responded with violence, he says, to the wanton killing of people in Phoenix during last year's July unrest. You'll remember, of course, that at least 36 people were killed by the alleged vigilante groups in that part of KZN during the rioting, end of quote. Now, I want to come to you guys on this one, as I perhaps just quickly get it off screen. There it is. Martin, I'll begin with you, because the point I made in Vuganazo, and again, I want to rehash it here, it's very telling that Julius Malema focuses only on Phoenix when it relates to the July riots of last year. Phoenix, of course, where absolutely there should be law, or rather, there should be justice insofar as law enforcement doing the investigations, finding perpetrators and blocking them up. But 36 people died there. But if you look at it, the whole picture, in other words, if you're not focused on the whole, but the actual whole barn door itself, 350 people plus died during those riots. It's really instinctive racism, if you will, tacit, hidden racism by Malema to focus on Phoenix, where, of course, the usual trope of Indians did this comes out.
Yeah, look, the thing is, it's tacit and it's underlying, but the EFF is also very open about its racism. We've seen this repeatedly. Julius Malema just won a court case against AfriForum the other day after he threatened genocidal violence on the basis of race, and the court said that's okay, it's fine. And in the same speech, I think it's at the same speech, Malema said that EFF members must support the Zulu monarchy. They must go out in masses to the coronation of the new king, not because of any royalist sentiment or any traditional respect for the institution, but because it's the only existing black institution in South Africa, apparently, and for that reason, it must be supported. So while the EFF does have thick binders of Marxist-Leninist ideology on its website and in its archives, probably, they understand, they know that the only way for them to win votes is to go for the jugular, go for race. That's all that Malema and the EFF actually offer. They know if they talk about the exploited masses and the proletariat and all these things, what Lenin said about the revolution, they'll lose their 10% in parliament and they will be fade into obscurity, like the South African Communist Party is an obscure entity in our political landscape. So they know they have to use the rhetoric of race, and when you see that rhetoric associated with appeals to violence like this, and in the back of your mind with a very strong communist ideology, that saying comes to mind that I think all South Africans always need to be reminded of, and that is that you vote your way into socialism, but you are going to have to shoot your way out if you want to get away from it. And that's the risk with the EFF. Julius Malema shows us exactly how they would govern if they were ever in power directly or in a coalition. And it's something we need to be very careful about. This is not a guy you want in power. Even if you're a leftist, even if you're on the left, that's perfectly fine. This is not the guy you want in power. You want go and look for some Norwegian type socialist and vote for them in South Africa. You don't want Malema. He will destroy everything.
And again, Martin, you're spot on. But there's something really fundamentally gross and disgusting about this individual. And I say this as someone, of course, who raised in Durban. The Indian community is very close to my heart. I mean, the communities of Chatsworth, for instance, are not more than 10 minutes away from me. And of course, Indians in South Africa are culturally ingrained in the country. When Diwali comes around, hey man, when them sweetmeats start being passed around in the office and them hands start digging in for that. Well, my hands used to be a part of those scrum. But, there's a deeper hate here that Malema harbors for minorities. Minorities in Malema's worldview are in the way, if you will, of his stated goal of creating a socialist nirvana, or in my case, a dystopia in this country. Minorities, of course, get in the way of that, because here are these people, whether they're Indian, white, colored, or even a minority of Black South Africans who are in the middle class, who effectively stand against his message of we're victims. And because we're victims, we need the state to do things for us. No. It doesn't surprise me that Malema, therefore, his whole lexicon of the EFF is to be anti-minorities.
Yeah, true. The funny thing is that the whole racial rhetoric of Malema, I think it's the only thing that the party has. If you look at how they started, they gained a lot of momentum, even for people who didn't necessarily vote for the party, because they masqueraded as these people who are for the Black people and who would fight anyone or anything that seemed to have more than Black people. And because of that, that is why he's always looking for any minority group that seem to be united and that empower one another, because he believes that they are the ones that tend to be our distraction as Black people, which, if you look at it, it's got nothing to do with him wanting to unify us to do or be like those minority, because there's a lot to learn from other minority groups in South Africa. Even that thought of having to divide ourselves like that, but it is a human nature. You can't really avoid that a certain group of people will prefer doing things a certain way, and that doesn't mean that they are actually on the way or in the way of other people. We all have our choices, but Malema prefers to keep on telling us that it's always the other person who's withholding us as Black people, who's hating us, who wants to kill us. So because of that, therefore, we should be hating them, which he knows, he himself, he doesn't believe the things that he say. Even the fact that we see that every time we see him being with other white people and taking money from white people, for that matter, and having lawyers who are white. I know in this instance, he didn't really necessarily attack white people, but I'm just making an example of the man himself, that the game he's playing, he knows exactly the kind of game that he's playing. And the unfortunate thing, he knows the kind of people that we are, I guess, as ordinary Black people, that we tend to be prone to anything that wants to make us believe that there's someone out there, and it's not necessarily internal, that we can work on to be better as Black people of this country, which is pretty sad if you really think about it, because he's not empowering. He just wants to keep us in this perpetual cycle of victimhood and making us not believe that, you know what, I really don't have time to be worrying about minority groups in this country. I just want to be productive, have a family, and just be somebody who's of good value and principle, and work in the economy that is viable for me as a young person, so that I can also bring and participate in that economy. So he doesn't necessarily talk about that. He just wants to keep us as victims. And yeah, it's quite sad.
And again, Nolu hits the nail on the head there. Here's an individual, Bheki, who plays on all the worst tropes. An individual who, his politics, it's a politics of envy, number one. And number two, in fact, like all communists and socialists, it's always the politics of envy. He has something and I don't. Therefore, if I'm to have something, I must take it from him. There's no message, as Nolu points out, of how about I emulate that, build myself up, grow an income, from that income, build household savings, from those household savings, build wealth over time. No, that's never the message of the commie. The commie says, oh no, I need to destroy the very institutions that protect the wealth of someone else, because the moment I destroy those institutions, I can then stick my grubby commie hands on their goods and redistribute to others. That's why I'm doing it. The commies wink. But I joke about it, but really, there's a very serious and dangerous underlying ideology behind what Malema does, and it's very cunning in its nature. Bringing you back, of course, to where we began the story, his focus, for example, on Indians in Phoenix as it related to the July riots removes context completely as to what happened to the other, 310 plus, 310 lives who were lost outside of Phoenix do those lives not matter? Are they any less important?
Yeah, that's a very good question there, Sihle. And Nolu touched on something very important there, in which these politicians use these racial tactics, these racial talking points, to deviate from the most important thing that's facing the country. And that's high levels of poverty, low levels of employment. Like what happened during the July riots was really people being frustrated about the low living standards in South Africa. And so that's why we saw such massive levels of looting, the burning down of businesses. Not to say it was justified, but mostly the core issues of the country are not being tackled. I mean, currently we have about 12 million South Africans unemployed. That's under the expanded definition. And our economy barely grows beyond 1% when you compare us to other countries that are growing about 4%. So these are the issues that these politicians will never touch on. And the reason why they don't touch on them is because they do not have the answers to solve those issues. So they use these tactics to sort of deviate from the core issues the country is facing. And there's an interesting thing that politicians like Malema think. They think about that the economy cannot expand. It is how it is right now. And the only way to empower South Africans, particularly Black South Africans in this regard, when you're looking at the EFF, is to redistribution. When you look at examples, has that ever worked in any meaningful sense? You look at such example in our neighboring African countries, you look at Latin America as well. The case study is always that of failure, because also what also happens by weakening those institutions in such as property rights, or such as that of South Africans' ability to protect themselves. Not to say that there should not be rules. There should definitely be law and order. And in some respect, the government does also have a role to play there. But these politicians, by attacking South African institutions, attack the very nature of families, attack individuals in the country, attack the ability for South Africans to empower themselves through the economy, by getting a job, by building savings. That is what Malema is after. He's not particularly after Indians. He's not particularly after white people. He is after your wealth. He's after your savings. He's after your job, because that is the resulting consequence of the policies that he would like to implement.
Be very careful, dear viewer, of the wily, the snake oil salesman, leftist, whether they are socialist or communist, who promises you that somehow they can create a land of milk and honey, a nirvana, if you will, by taking from other people and, quote, redistributing to others. Bheki is spot on in calling out that nonsense as exactly that. It's nonsense. By the numbers alone, it doesn't work. Let's assume for a moment that we take everything from the 3 million now, 3 million population of white South Africans, and disperse it to the over 40 million plus black South Africans. Those numbers alone, at the most basic elementary level, do not work. You cannot create wealth off of what 3 million people perceivably have. Again, I'm using their logic here, people. Bear with me. You cannot create wealth doing that. Economist Milton Friedman made the point absolutely crystal clear. Instead of redistribution, rather focus on a better distribution of income. Don't redistribute wealth. Distribute income better. Have more individuals in your society working, earning an income. And from that income, building household savings. And from those household savings, buying themselves a higher standard of living. That's what you want in a functional society. Guys, let me move us on. Because we have a jam-packed show tonight. Welcome to it. If you're watching tonight's show, this is Liberty and Friends. My name is Sihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty. In the house today is Bheki, Mahlobo, economist at ETM Analytics, the fellas down in Cape Town. Shout out to Russell Lamberti, homie of mine in that part of the world. Nolu Maki, also in the Western Cape, marketing specialist. You can find her on her social medias. Will have all of that at the end of the show. And of course, Martin van Staden from the Institute of Race Relations. This is Liberty and Friends. Hit that like button. Guys, I'm going to move us on to something again. We covered it in Vuganazo this week. Government and its insistence on centralizing power and having government and political elites do everything, even though they do it terribly. What am I talking about? I'm talking, of course, about the proposed ESKOM of water that they are looking to establish. That's the Department of Water and Sanitation. Bear with me, folks, as I just get it on the screen. There it is. It should pop up in a moment. No, that previous image was better. There we go. Here it is, folks. The government promising a new agency that will control water. It remains to be seen, the article says, whether the new water agency will be yet another failed state-owned entity. Government is in the final stages of establishing what will be called, pardon me, I sound like Porky Pig there, government is in the final stages of establishing what will be called the National Water Resources Infrastructure Agency. Sure. Do they not like these acronyms? The ownership of all dams, here's the kicker, guys. The ownership of all dams and related infrastructure will be transferred from the Department of Water and Sanitation to this ESKOM of water. Martin, as I get us back on screen here, there we go. Martin, let me come back to you. This love affair of politicians and of centralizing power and creating more state-owned enterprises. Do we need more businesses run by the state?
I'm laughing now because it's almost exactly the same situation as ESKOM. You just read there that they're going to transfer the assets from the Department of Water and Sanitation to this new national agency, and it's like when they announced 2 or 3 years ago ESKOM is going to be split in 3. So that's going to solve the electricity crisis. We're just going to create new corporate incorporations for different parts of the same problem. No, it's not going to work. The funniest part of that same article you had on the screen is that people were complaining and saying, "Oh, this is going to be another corrupt state-owned enterprise." And one Dr. Sean Phillips of the department said, "No, listen, National Treasury and the Water and Sanitation Department will be represented on the board of this new agency, so that's a safeguard. And all board members are to have the required qualifications and experience. So we're saved." I mean, this won't be the first law that says board members need to have the required experience. We have laws from the late 90s that say the exact same thing. Those haven't stopped corruption, but that's beside the point because corruption is not the problem. Listen to me clearly now. ESKOM is not failing South Africa because it's corrupt. Yes, that's part of it. ESKOM is failing South Africa because it's a monopoly. And we all have the exact same problems. In fact, we are having the exact same problems with water already because we've monopolized water in the state. The reason why the Western Cape a few years ago had a worse drought than it otherwise would have had was because government was in charge of water. It did not allow the market to respond to a natural disaster. Granted, the government didn't cause the drought, but it did not allow the market, as markets do, to respond to the natural disaster by increasing prices of water. No, we kept the price of water nice and low because we care about the poor or something. And lo and behold, they had to introduce rationing, and the drought was just far worse than it would have been if a privatized system of water, which would have responded to, firstly, the infrastructure would have been maintained, the infrastructure that is now falling apart in Gauteng, for instance. Private companies tend to maintain their infrastructure, but also the market would be able to respond based on market incentives, on the profit incentive, on good social forces. Unlike government, where you will always have perverse incentives. There will be corruption in this organization, and there will be a lot of it, but that won't be the problem. The problem will be that there are perverse incentives built into the very foundations of this entity. And we need to learn this lesson as South Africans. We need to stop looking to government and say, oh, we have a water problem, government needs to fix it. Oh, we have an electricity problem, government needs to fix it. We need to understand that government is the reason why we are having a water and electricity problem. We need to privatize these things. I know that P word is even worse than that Afrikaans P word people like so much. Privatization. Privatization is a word that people are afraid of. You shouldn't be. Privatization sometimes leads to more corruption, but it decentralizes your risk. It decentralizes the risk. It ensures that if there's corruption or mismanagement at one point, that won't be felt throughout the entire system. If you monopolize it, as of this agency or of ESKOM, if you monopolize it and there's corruption or mismanagement at that point, everyone suffers equally and you crash the entire economy and your entire society when we're talking about water, even more important than electricity. Let us learn this lesson now.
And the lesson goes deeper, Bheki. I want to come to you here because there's an economics imperative in this entire thing, which is almost forgotten, given the ideology that dominates our politics here. Economics always recognizes scarcity. Politics doesn't. Politics pretends as if scarcity doesn't exist. And because economics prioritizes, or not prioritizes, but recognizes scarcity, prices are an important tool to communicate market signals. If there is a drought, that is a scarcity of water, prices shoot up, and that communicates down the chain, if you will, that behavior has to change in order to factor in for this. But if you have a government that gets in the way of that signaling channel. I mean, Frederick Hayek talks about prices being exactly this, right? If you have a government that gets in the way, then what stops me from running a tap the whole day, even though I'm told on TV day zero is approaching?
Most definitely there, Sihle. And also, like, one aspect that Martin also touched on is that government agencies do not face the profit motive, which is also very important for a functioning economy. Like you said, the scarcity is real. This is something that is ignored by politicians. The reason why there's prices is because there's not an infinite amount of goods to meet our wants and needs that we want as South Africans. So prices reflect the scarcity of each good, and it moderates how people use water. So if water is quite expensive, then you use less of it. You use less of it to be more efficient of it, so that you don't pay a higher water bill. Same thing for every other good, for example. And when government starts to murk the lines of prices that send signals towards South Africans, then unfortunately you face a situation where South Africans do not use water sparingly. And if you want a proper case example of this, I mean, we've touched on this one, is that of ESKOM. We've had about more than 100 days of load shedding. Over 2,000 hours of load shedding. If you want that data point, just look at your ESKOM Push app, in which they pinned this data on their Twitter page. Over 2,000 hours of load shedding in the country. And what are the consequences of this? Consequences are never paid for by the people that signed these policies into South African legislation. They're never paid by the politicians. They're paid for by ordinary South Africans. And water is the most important resource in the country. If you, for example, have load shedding, sure, it is a problem. It's an inconvenience. It disrupts businesses as well. It's very detrimental to the South African economy. But if you disrupt water, how are you going to cook? How are you going to wash? How are you going to hydrate yourself? These are very important issues. I don't even think the politicians even themselves understand the great gravity of the issues that they're tackling here. And it's the fundamental problem, which is what Martin also touched on there, is the whole point of nationalization of certain goods in the country, be it that of energy, be it that of water, be it that of any other particular institution like South Africa. It never ends well. It always ends in misallocation of resources, because how is the government going to allocate the decision of millions of South Africans? 60 million people are supposed to be guided by the actions of just less than 80 people when you're looking at the ANC, NEC executive board. How does that make any level of sense? You can't. They simply cannot. And so this should be left to private individuals to allocate resources based on prices, and which is what you have touched on there, Sihle.
Absolutely. And I've, as the folks who are watching have probably noticed, I'm beginning to scroll or put, your comments up on screen. So please keep them coming in thick and fast, but also do me a favor, hit that like button. Do it now. It helps with the algorithm. It helps get the show to a broader audience. Hit that like button and help me grow my show. This is Liberty and Friends. Yazi, Nolu, I've been quoting Economist all evening today. Goodness me. So I must be in a good mood. We have a situation here where, again, the same economist, Milton Friedman, put it quite nicely and succinctly. Nobody is as careful with other people's stuff as they are with their own stuff. I use this quote to make the example that we see it. The moment you tell someone that something is free, they don't need to take responsibility for it. It will be provided by someone in the ether. Some politician promises a free good. People are not careful with that resource. We see this, for example, in the township where I live, where communal taps can run the whole day. No one takes responsibility for that situation. A culture change, Nolu, desperately needed.
True, and I think as we're talking, I realized the strategy that the ANC always plays. They came in as the nationalists who said the government will take care of everything. They dissolved family, and so much that we can be more susceptible to their ideologies, which actually they're just meant to feed their stomachs as opposed to ordinary South Africans. And that is why you find that a lot of people, especially a lot of poor Black people, not even the poor, believe that the government tends to be more fair than the private sector. The private sector, they are capitalists, they just want money, and they don't care about the individuals. However, though, the same people who are saying that, I've just refilled the electricity here, and the when you buy for 200, you get just a measly of what you just bought. So for me, I just find that to be it's a huge lie. Because there's something wrong. There's greed, there's monopoly, even on the government's end. So that's why I say that the ANC, they are in a long-term game, and they've been doing this because they know that when family, they are destroyed, there's no way that people will be able to think critically about things, but they just they want us to be under a nanny state where let's give it to government. Government knows what to do with it, not individuals, not me and my family deciding that, no, we don't want to use this service provider. Let's use another service provider because that's what private sector provides us with options. No, government needs to choose for me. Can you imagine that? Despite that, it is my money in my hands that I have, but no, the government must tell me how to use that money. So there's no competition in that, and because of that, we can't really make our own choices. So for me, I'd say that the ANC really, I must applaud them on this because they came as the good, the ones who are for the people, and they knew that when they brought that message, our people will believe it, and they'll stop wanting to be productive to have things so that they can choose to buy and say to our government, no, I want to choose where I can actually, when it comes to our water system, for instance, for an example, because they know that they are brewing a generation that has resentment towards the private sector. So that is why you find that that is why we these conversations, even those of us who've got education, they'll be like, no, but the capitalists, they are just greedy and all of the bad things that you can think about under the sun, forgetting that the government is never your friend.
I always find
touch
people
on there another point on just.
I'll let you come in big in a second. Just a quick quip here. I always find people who talk about greedy capitalists really funny. it's always the next person who's greedy, not them. When they're selling something and they want maximum profit for whatever they're particularly selling, oh no, I'm not greedy, they'll say. It's always the next person. Bheki?
I was actually going to say that point there, Sihle. It's like, people have, well, some people, not all South Africans, have this point of view of the private sector being these greedy individuals with suit and ties, deciding decisions of your daily life. But what is like the private sector? Private sector is just really ordinary South Africans that are providing for themselves as well as their families. That is what the private sector is. Even you going to your job is participating in the private sector. You are economizing. You are seeking income to provide for yourself as well as for your families. That is indeed that is what free market is. That was what capitalism is. These politicians use these terms as a derogatory sense of describing what it is, but it's simply people interacting with each other and exchanging goods and improving their livelihoods. That is what it is at its simplest form. So whenever you have these politicians attacking the private sector, greedy private sectors, capitalism, they are essentially attacking you as a South African, as an individual. That's what it is.
I've never not found it surprising, the ignorance in this country insofar as the politics. Bheki is spot on. There's almost this image of what capitalists are. It's almost that that late 80s, early 90s image that we grew up with of these sort of white men in top hats and coats walking into corporate CBDs, sort of grinding the face of the poor as they walk by. But in reality, that mama selling fat cook and archer, or if you go to Durban CBD, see them ladies, tipped their hats with the side, selling you like the hot plate or whatever the case may be. Come in the afternoons when that lady is doing cash up and see the wads of cash they're counting, and tell me if that isn't the most beautifully capitalist sight that you'll see. Speaking about beautiful, I have good, beautiful numbers of individuals in the comment section today. Keep those comments coming in, but also do me that favor. Hit the like button. This is Liberty and Friends. We're beginning to cook with grease now as we get through the topics in conversation tonight with Martin van Staden from the IRR. There you see him in the bottom hand, or my left-hand corner, your right-hand corner. Bheki Mahlobo, right there, economist with the ETM Analytics, and Nolu Maki in the panel marketing specialist. Speak to her if you need something marketed. Her details will be available at the end of the show. This is Liberty and Friends. Hit that like button. Guys, I'm going to move us on because there was a very interesting topic this week. Coalitions. Yo, this has been a brutal week for coalitions as South Africans are beginning to ask the questions, is this nonsense worth it? Of course, I'm asking that. My opinion is not cited quite yet, but frustration building around these coalitions as seemingly it becomes a revolving door of that mayor, not that mayor, that speaker, not that speaker. This week, we saw the return of the Mac, I'm just kidding, the return of Mpho Phalatse, DA mayor, who had taken, of course, the Johannesburg speaker, A1 Colleen Makubele, to court, basically saying you removed me illegally because the meeting, that is the council meeting you called to do that, was an illegally called council meeting. The courts, of course, agreeing with Mpho Phalatse, bringing her back in to the seat of power. Let me put that on screen there just for a moment, just for a bit of flavor. You know how I do on the show. Just give me a second here, people. But as I said, Mpho Phalatse back in the mayoral chain. For how long is perhaps the question a lot of people are asking, as I'm hoping this program will behave. This was so much smoother earlier on. There she is. Mpho Phalatse back, as I said, in the hot seat in Johannesburg. They see her gleaming there with a big smile. But where the DA's Mpho Phalatse is coming back into the mayoral seat, another candidate then found herself being kicked out of that very seat. I'm talking, of course, Tanya Campbell, the mayor, the DA's mayor of the Ekurhuleni metro. It is a metro, I'm right. The DA metro in that part of the world. She being removed by a gaggle of MPs, pardon me, guys. A gaggle of councillors, excuse me, is the word I was looking for, including, by the way, individuals who used to be in her coalition. There she is on screen. I think she's on screen, looking rather miserable there. She's not quite on screen yet. There she is, looking rather miserable there. Let me read this piece, of course, that speaks about how exactly and who were the political parties that removed Tanya Campbell, the DA, facing another defeat after their mayor in Ekurhuleni. Tanya Campbell was removed from the position during a motion of no confidence this week on Wednesday. Campbell faced a motion of no confidence from the ANC, which effectively then was able to get the AIC, ICM, PAC, which of course is the Pan-Africanist Congress, the UDM, the United Democratic Movement, ATM, the African Transformation Movement, NFP, and COPE to support that particular motion. A total of 100 councillors supported her removal, while only 93 voted against that motion of no confidence. Here's where it gets interesting. The EFF abstaining from the vote. Martin, what do you make of this?
Yeah, no, I'm a bit less pessimistic than other people about coalitions. As the resident libertarian, I guess, unstable government makes me very excited. So even when it's the parties that I tend to vote for that are unseated, it gives me a feeling of warmth to think that if the ANC or the EFF is in power, another ragtag group of guys can just unseat them when they push a little bit too far. And that's what I'm very excited about going into 2024. Now, of course, what we're seeing now are growing pains. It's to be expected. We are really just at the beginning of South Africa's coalition era, if you want to call it that. And a lot of people, including quite a lot of people in the DA, in fact, have effectively said, no, it's dead. It can't work. It's not going to work for us. We need to regulate it. The DA has already proposed legislation. It horrifies me. But no, it takes years, decades for constitutional conventions and practices to develop around coalitions. Now, I think a party like the PA, the Patriotic Alliance in Johannesburg, they've been pretty clear about the fact that they're in it for position. So Gayton McKenzie has been tweeting like crazy about how he and his party feel insulted and how they don't get positions, and this is why they're voting against Palatse's government. Like never anything about the government was discriminating against our voters and they were doing bad things in government. No, it's only about we're insulted by the arrogance of someone. So that party will not last. It may last in the Karoo, where I hear Gayton might be doing something semi competently, but in Johannesburg it won't last. COPE COPE has been on the way out for a while, but I see COPE as part of the gaggle of parties that removed Tanya Campbell. I don't think COPE is going to have that seat in the next municipal elections anymore. Now, this is something that should reassure us, because voters are looking at this and they can see who the parties are that aren't engaging with the coalition concept in a constructive way. Action SA, for instance, for all its faults, I think is semi-constructively engaging in the coalition system. There seems to be some institutions, they seem to have some level of principles underlying a lot of their disruptiveness, and that's reassuring because they're playing the game. The DA is playing the game. The IFP is playing the game. The ANC to an extent is playing the game. The EFF to an extent is playing the game. But these real spoilers, the PA, COPE, these one-man shows, I think they are going to either be disciplined in the long term and see that we need to start conceiving of South Africa as a coalition country and we need to start playing the coalition game, or they're going to be wiped out. And I think when that happens in a few years, maybe in a few decades, unfortunately, this whole thing will stabilize. But it will be stable in a very unstable kind of way that makes me very happy. And that is that if you look at countries like Israel, countries who have very strong institutions, who have very wealthy countries, they have unstable coalition politics. And that is something we need to embrace, because once we're into that, and we understand it, and we're a mature coalition democratic country, then we won't see things like expropriation without compensation. We won't see things like ludicrous employment equity legislation, because the moment these astoundingly dumb ideas get introduced, the coalition partners in whoever's government is introducing them are going to say, hey, no, we're going to end your government right now if you go for this. And we haven't seen that up until now with the ANC's one-party dominance. So I'm pretty hopeful. I think we're moving into an era that's it's going to be difficult. It's going to be frustrating, as you said, Sigle. It might hurt the economy a little bit for a while. But I think once we get used to it, once we develop those important political and constitutional conventions and practices around coalitions, I think South Africa is going to be in a far better place. And it's down to voters, really, to keep an eye on what's going on with the people they voted for and see, are they really playing the coalition game, or are they just trying to enrich themselves as individuals with positions and so on, and make sure that those people get out of the system, and that we can organize around a big group of parties that are really interested in coalition government.
Yes, Nolu, I've always found it interesting, though, that if you talk to voters, and again, opinion is divergent here. When you talk to people, though, you know what? People don't really give a flying fudge. They're just like, you know what? Just clean the streets, like pick up the trash, like let there be water that actually flows out the damn tap, the lights, let them work when I actually flick them on or off. I mean, it's funny here that we have these politicians playing this revolving door of musical chairs, whereas really as voters, we don't care. What's your view, Nolu?
True. And I think one of the things that are revealed to me is that politicians really care about themselves. Because I'm not hearing, with all the different opinions, even with what happened in Johannesburg, in Joburg, you don't hear them talking about the people who have placed them in power. This whole thing, it's not about the people. It is about them. It's about the fights, the infights that they have with one another. And that's the sad part. Truly, I am not surprised that this is how this was going to unfold anyhow, because of course a group of politicians who have different views on things, it's bound to end up like this, you know. But my question is this: is South Africa ready for it? I do not think so. And I think it puts us as ordinary South Africans really at a disadvantaged place right now. We all would love to be in a place where things are not necessarily just stable, but rather where you are livable, especially when it comes to our pockets. Because I see all of this and I'm thinking the most important things these people are not actually fixing right now. The safety, you know, as you said, the streets, everything, making sure that they are clean and making sure that the economy is viable, like I said earlier on, for people to really participate in. They don't necessarily care about that. So for me, they're making me nervous and not nervous per se. I'm not surprised, but I just think that I can see that truly politicians don't care about us. And I also hope that people are open to see their party, how are they behaving right now? Those who might believe that their political party is innocent or it's about racial, you know, let the blacks be together and just be against this white DA, you know. I hope they can see that even themselves, they can tell you very clear. No matter how many times Gayton may be doing great things where he's mayor right now, he tells it's all about power. So with that, what do you think of that? And what do you make of that? You know? So for me, I just think that we are not ready for them as of yet. It will take a while, as Martin said. Yes, they're good for us to have them, but I don't. With everything we are going through in South Africa, especially economically, I think it's another burden that we don't need right now. Yeah,
Absolutely. You know, Bheki, even before I come to you, let me just do a little bit of housekeeping. Folks, welcome to it. If you're watching the show, do me a solid favor. Hit that like button. Do it right now as you hear me speak. It costs you nothing. Hit that like button. It helps grow the show and get it to a wider audience. And I want them to hear Bheki's view on this. Bheki, as I was saying, coming to you, it seems unfathomable for me that these politicians play these games. And Nolu is quite right. There is scant mention of the constituents who they who they represent in this conversation. Let me be precise and specific. Here on this show, I hosted the very politicians about 3 weekends ago on Liberty and Friends, where we spoke about the coalition, what happened in Joburg. At the time, of course, it was the loss of Upalatse. That conversation revolved around them, their egos, what they did or didn't do, who said or didn't say something. He said, she said, she said, all the transgender folks came out and was like, excuse me, who said what? But it all revolved around their egos, their personalities. And I sat there thinking to myself, heck, what about that Goko sitting in ESKOM, pardon me, in Soweto right now? Lights out, because ESKOM and the city have failed them. What about that individual in Santon? Leave aside the fact that they live in Santon, who's complaining about the potholes, complaining about the trash mounting up on their corner, causing now a public health issue of a rat infestation. I can go down the line of the issues that become prevalent when a municipality fails. Why? Because politicians have forgotten them. Bheki, what about the business community? How do you run a business in a municipality if we don't know who the mayor will be or even the administration will be 1 week from the next?
Hey man, at this point I change mayors every other week. Okay. It's truly concerning, Sihle, honestly. You know, what happened in the November elections, the local elections, was really a rejection of the many years of decline in service delivery in many of the communities that I grew up in, as well as around the communities in South African municipalities. Literally, like where you can see this, it doesn't even take that long really to see what's going on. Where you're seeing potholes on the streets, you're seeing sewage on the roads. When you passing by Alex, for example, as well as some of the points that you've mentioned there, Sihle. And also this impacts negatively on businesses. How are businesses supposed to operate in an environment of extreme uncertainty, in an environment where you have mayors changing every other week, you have the issues are not being addressed, as well as that of the people that live in these municipalities. And unfortunately, this is very detrimental. And I think, particularly looking at the coalitions here, I think the voters put these people in power really to just deliver on the basic stuff, which they seem to not be doing. And I think what just happens now with what you're seeing in the city of Johannesburg, as well as that of Ekurhuleni, is that this will weaken the party that's causing this level of instability when it comes around to the next elections and so forth. I think these politicians don't really see the long game of this, and even if they do, I think some of them are really looking at their pockets more than the constituencies as you've mentioned there, Sihle. And I don't think the ones that are not delivering on service delivery will particularly survive in the coming elections.
One does get that sense of things, but hey, South African voters will always surprise you. Here we have a slice of SA politics of hard leftists who make up about 15% of our politics at the moment. Absolutely of no use to man or beast. Yet there they are, sitting in parliament, collecting paychecks. Guys, Martin, I'm going to come back to you in a moment. There's a question here I wanted to flag. There it is, by Joking Atheist. Joking Atheist, question for your panel. Does your panel believe that the ANC would relinquish power after witnessing what we're seeing in terms of course, the shenanigans in coalitions? Excellent question there by Joking Atheist. I'm going to go around the room. Martin, take a stab at that.
I found the ANC has relinquished power in the Western Cape in various municipalities. It's all the precedents tell us that yes, they will. But I think the national level is a different ball game, and we can see that the ANC will pull out all the stops to ensure that it won't lose power. I think it will play some games like with the new electoral amendment bill. I think it will try and use the courts. I think it will try and disrupt coalitions. Do I think it will, after, for instance, a court says, hey, okay, you've tried, you've lost now, guys. If the Constitutional Court says, ANC, you've lost, go. I think they will go. I don't think they'll cross that line. I may be naive, but I don't think, firstly, that they have the competence to pull a coup d'etat. And I don't think they have the actual support necessary to actually legitimize something like that. I think that if they try that, there will be an uprising of some description or another to stop them. So I don't think we'll go there, but the ANC is gonna cause us a lot of trouble the weaker it gets. So let's not lose sight of that.
Pardon me. Nolu, lots of points made by Martin there. A lot of them I agree with, actually. But here's, hey man, these crooked cadres, they've been living that high life of tenders, political patronage, it'll be kind of hard letting go of that. Once the game's up at a national level.
Yeah, I also doubt they'd want to let go because they don't have anything else to fall back on. Let's start from there. To them, this is their bread and butter, and I doubt if they'd even have what I called third or fourth generation wealth with all the money that they've squandered all these years. I doubt that they would want to let go, which will put us, as I said before, into a huge disadvantage as a country. So I fear what's going to happen, but I just think also that with our justice system, maybe it might come to our rescue. I do not know, but it will be quite a dramatic show to watch.
No, I'm gonna just jump in there. Just check your mic because there's a rather awkward demonic second voice coming through. Like it sounds like what's that movie with that Japanese lady in the shadow? Or it sounds like Beloved. Bad. Just check your mic. With that being said, let me just come back to the question, Bheki. I must pose that mic, Gwena. I really meant this. The patronage network, the tender network, the criminality, that is the toxic nexus of politicians, the political elites, and the criminally minded, that little triangle, very lucrative industry in this country. And if you then have a situation where the politicians like the ANC are losing, the whole edifice, collapses.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that's why they're passing, when you're looking at such policies such as the expropriation bill, the land court bill, as well as some of the racial policies that they're trying to push now, they can see that the confidence is waning. So they're trying to latch on as much as they can currently. And I think at their most weakness, I think this is where we're going to see a lot of infighting within the party, because what holds the ANC together, it's not necessarily the policies, the ideology, even though that does for sure play a part in this, but it's that patronage network that you've mentioned there, Sihle. Once those taps of money, of lucrative deals, of tender deals, BE deals start running dry, you're going to see a lot of these politicians stabbing each other in the back and so forth. And I think we've seen that already throughout this year. If you're looking at the president's allegations, if you're looking at other regulations as well, I think the ANC confidence is waning. I think they do see that. And I honestly think that going into the following elections, there's going to be a lot of infighting within each other. They're going to be passing a lot of policies that will be very detrimental for South Africa. So that's my, I hope I answered the question there.
Absolutely. We just lost Nolu there for a moment. I think she's probably just sorting her mic out. I'm going to bring her back in a moment. There she is, in fact, on screen. Nolu, can we just have a quick sound check with you?
Hi, can you hear me, Sihle?
Perfectly well. Thank you for troubleshooting that. Speaking about troubleshooting, if you're watching, do me a favor, hit that like button right now. You're watching Liberty and Friends. We are, officially in the last 30 minutes of the show. Remember, this is the only long format show we have on the BDL show. It's 90 minutes. And this is where you, of course, are very much a part of the show. Guys, once the tech improves, I'll start incorporating voice notes where you can add your comment to the show or put a question to the panel. And as always, as we improve things and it becomes more slick, we'll actually even have guys being able to come on and ask questions on the show. You can cam up and be on the show. So look forward to stuff, guys. We're building it as we fly, as I always say, and it's your contributions monthly of 100 Rand, which are helping me do this. We now officially have an editor on the show. So I'm actually kind of excited about that. The quality of things will improve. With that being said, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. Last half an hour of the show, I want to introduce the last topic here, because I think it's the meat and potatoes of the show. And that is, guys, the medium-term budget policy speech that was delivered by, actually, that's not the last topic. Hang on. Here I'm forgetting. Hi, Bo. Okay, let me come back to this topic here. there's something to be said about South Africa. It's a funny country, very funny country. We have a South African police service in this country. We pay it. It's meant to do its job. It has various divisions. Yet, even after all of that, it's led by an asshat of a police minister, useless character, a one Bheki, I want to be Al Capone. Let me first do this. Pardon me, because I want to hash this topic out. It even has some file footage. So bear with me, dear viewers. And in fact, as I'm doing that, just maybe hit that like button. Which clip is this? Yes, there it is. The state of lawlessness in this country is staggering. When you consider, for instance, that we should have a functional police service, we should have a intelligence service in this country that not only responds to crime, but detects it, and addresses it before it happens. We don't have that. In fact, we had a whole diplomatic spat between the US Embassy and the South Africans when the US issued a security alert saying, hey, there was going to be a potential terrorist attack on Saturday. That caused a whole diplomatic row. But I think the underlying issue is a salient one. Why is it that we have foreign agencies seemingly having intel and are able to share it with the public, albeit they shouldn't have in this instance because maybe it caused a panic? That's a separate issue for another day. But that intel, and with their law agencies in America, for example, they respond to these things before they happen. Why? Because it's seemingly in South Africa, we don't have that, even though we have a SAPS. What am I talking about here? We've seen the rise in this country of private security to the extent where for every one police officer now, South Africans have voted with their pockets and employed five private security individuals, recognizing that we don't have enough SAPS. And those private security guys are more visible. You're more likely to see them patrolling your streets, so they're doing a SAPS function in that regard. They're more effective in responding to crime when we do report it. In fact, have a look at this video, courtesy of, I'll credit them at the end of this clip. This is a private security company chasing after hardened criminals here in Durban. Those, of course, were armed burglars who, after a community reported on that matter, instantly, private security was on it, chased those guys down and did apprehend them. Shout out to that company. For the life of me, I can't find their name right now. It was all in my notes early on. But I want to get into this, guys. Let's unpack it for a moment. Because, as I said, we live in a country that is in a complete state of lawlessness. If a criminal wants to do something, even on so-called national key points, if they want to do something, they can do as they wish. Have a look at what happened at King Shaka Airport, where a disgruntled employee was able to break in, steal a fire truck, and then proceed to destroy property. Watch this. Pardon me, Martin. I think the point I'm trying to get at here is it seems South Africans trust private security more to protect life, liberty, and property rights.
Absolutely, and it's rightly as they should. Who's watching this video can honestly say that when they've been robbed, the first people they call are the South African Police Service. I don't think anyone except some very, very wealthy people in Sandton and Rondebosch may think, We should call the police because we're good South African citizens. We should just not cause offense to anyone. They might call the police first, and after the call doesn't go through, then they call the private security. But all normal South Africans either contact the neighborhood watch, or they contact their private security, or they contact their family and community to come and help them, because there is no South African police service. This is the reality we need to come to terms with. It simply does not exist. It is a paper tiger. It does not exist in reality. We spoke about the Julius Malema talking about the Durban, the July riots in KZN. There was no South African police service. We had community members and private security bailing out the police who were besieged in their own police stations, coming and rescuing them in their own police stations. And even the military, when it was deployed in the aftermath, there was no South African National Defense Force. They were in the peaceful areas. The areas where there was actual rioting, there was no military presence. There is no security apparatus in the South African government. And I think South Africa is just a perfect case study that the rest of the world very seriously must look at, for the idea that the private sector cannot fulfill the policing function. It can, and it does so in a very high quality professional way. Now, I've heard that some of these private security companies even now have their own detectives. They have these very advanced control rooms with like uber modern technology with CCTV cameras all around their clientele. They have these they have interceptors, that video you just showed us, highly trained security operatives and detectives. As I said, something that in South Africa was recently, very recently, you wouldn't have imagined that there would be such a thing as a private like police detective, and that is something that's being taken over by private security in South Africa, and rightly so. And we need to actually embrace this. I think it's a great story, not only for safety, because this is really it is changing the safety of ordinary South Africans, especially as neighborhood watches get established, which are free and are not as expensive as private security, but also that it has this decentralizing effect on the corrupt ANC government. We were talking about, would the ANC peacefully hand over power? Well, when you have a private security force in this country that outnumbers the police, I think by orders of magnitude, they probably will think twice about trying anything weird. But that being said, we need to be vigilant about them trying to regulate private security out of existence. That's always something we need to be careful of.
I just want to throw some numbers in here. Bheki, I'm going to come to you because, as always, numbers don't lie. And specifically, the numbers that matter here is where South Africans are willing to spend their money in order to guarantee the same services, which government has monopolized, whether rightly or wrongly, is not what I'm prosecuting here. But government has, as a statement of fact, has monopolized. That is safety, for instance. Let me cite some numbers here. And you'll give me a second as I just get it on screen. This always takes a moment or two. There it is. Let's open that tab. And that's one little piggy. There we go. Okay, unaccustomed as I am to citing, what's this thing? Wikipedia. But I think this is an important point. The data it points out here. I'm going to read it just for the sake of the audience who might not be able to read on screen. Welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. We're talking safety and security. And I'm asking the question, is private security in South Africa replacing law enforcement by way of SAPS and state law enforcement, The private security industry in South Africa is among the largest in the world, with over 9,000 registered companies. Let me hit you again with that number. 9,000 registered security companies, 450,000 registered active security guards, and a further, here's a whopping number, brace yourself, 1.5 million qualified but inactive guards. This is many times more than the available personnel within the South African police and South African army combined. Studies have shown that South Africa had 2.57 private security personnel for every police employee. End of quote. And that number has actually grown to now 5 for every police employee. Let me just get this off the screen. Bear with me, folks. Bheki, it's quite clear to me that South Africans are willing to cough up some extra cashola in order to ensure that they have safety and security. Someone, if you will, who they can outsource the violence to look after their life, their liberty, and their property rights. The question now for me is, what about the poor? What can they do?
Yeah, I mean, there's a need for private security in the country, Sisha. I mean, South Africa's murder rate, what is it, 36 per 100,000, which is about 7 times above the world average. South Africa is a very dangerous place. 10 violent protests every day. And there's threats to ordinary South Africans, their livelihoods, as well as their families, as well as that of businesses. I mean, the key theme that we've touched on beginning the chat, the podcast, yes, is that we touched on Phoenix, as well as other neighboring areas. You know, we saw, like, through the news channels, for example, where it was actually news media during the July riots that got there first before the police can, because the police cannot maintain law and order in the country. They simply cannot do so anymore. And that's why South African individuals are relying on private security, are building high walls, are building watchdogs in their communities, as well as in other neighboring areas, not necessarily middle class, but as well as in other poor areas, which I've seen in Ekurhuleni. But unfortunately, there are the ones that are left out, and those are poor individuals in the country, whereby they do not have access towards the police. Now the police is seen as a privilege, whereas these individuals are paying for it be it through their tax, not only through their income, but as well as through other means in which South Africans are taxed. And these services are not met. These basic services to protect South Africans, to protect their property, is not being done. And I've seen this throughout all the communities that I've lived in, as well as in rural areas, for example. And unfortunately, when you have an environment where the police cannot maintain law and order, you therefore fester an environment of high crime levels, an environment of high gangs, which is what I've also seen, as all matched with unemployed youth, which therefore also join these gangs, and you see high levels of crime activity in South Africa. These are the issues, unfortunately, that will not be tackled by the South African Police Service. I mean, there was a beautiful interaction a few months ago between the police minister, Bheki, as well as community watchdog Ian Cameron, which he was talking about the real issues on the ground, which Bheki refuted them by showing his struggling credentials, which South Africans do not care about the struggling credentials. They care about their safety. Are they safe going to the work? Are they safe coming back from work? Are they safe when they sleep? These are the common questions that South Africans ask themselves each and every day. And unfortunately, the police minister simply is not protecting them through means of an effective police service.
Guys, I must say this quickly, because those of you who are fans of the show know that I'm actually someone who's very much in support of our ordinary men and women in blue in this country. Let's not fool ourselves. One has to separate issues. The police officers on the ground, the majority of them at least, I'm not saying every single one, absolutely care about the communities they police. No one is willing to wear a bulletproof vest and don that service pistol and enter into the darkest and scariest alleys of dangerous crime-infested South Africa to put their lives on risk if they didn't care about the people they're doing this. The problem for me is that far too often the management structure of our police, the political leadership of our police is completely corrupt, inept, and really should not be anywhere near managing our men and women in blue in this country. That is often where the choke points are in this country. And if anything, you're seeing it in how ordinary police officers, once they get some quality training, some experience, they leave and often enter the very private sector that we're talking about here, bringing that expertise, with them. Nolu, we've seen this all too often, where for me, I've always argued whether it's the poorer LSM groupings, middle class or rich folks, people look to private options in order to deal with criminals in the area. Let me be precise and specific. I'm in Mlazi at the moment. If I were to take this camera and take a walk down the street live, you'll see groupings of guys. What's the time now? 9:15, in reflective vests, carrying nopkeris, some of them because they're part of the Zulu Amabutu, will have some spears, and of course, the legal gun owners will have their guns on them. And we've begun to man bus stops in the evening so that people who are returning from work can come home and not worry about being mugged. That's a private solution.
True, and I think that that's just my worry, because now I've noticed even in our community, such as of course Elokshini, you find that people, they are also resorting to private security. But the downside about that, you find that the very same people they're working with SAPS, or rather let me say the people who some people refer to whenever there's crime, you find that they're the very same ones who are actually odds. So you find that then it tends to be for the people, though that sector, if I would call them a sector, that location, it tends to be disadvantaged in that sense, because they get to be used, just for the money, not necessarily for protection. That's why you find that there's such things as you need to buy your protection in our communities. If you've got a car or whatever, you need to have a group of people that, you know what, they'll be there for me. But then the downside about that is that very same person, because you never bargain with a criminal, they will turn against you just to prove that, you know what, we can't do something, and these guys, they are around and they will steal your things, so give me more money. I'm not saying this to say let's regulate these things. I'm just saying that if the government, at least in lower communities, they would be able to do their work, then there wouldn't be a need for that. I don't know if you hear me, because those who can afford, when people can afford, they would always want something better, competent, efficient. And that's a choice that you have and that you make with your money. But can I also choose, if I can't afford it, when there is a free service, such as not just a security, in this case, even like a clinic or whatever that is provided by the government, can it be an option? Because not all of us have the same amount of money to afford these security companies. So for me, I think that's where I'd say that in those communities, I feel more sorry for them, because you find that that's where they're being used, exploited with their money. Because who are you going to trust really? If we know that there's a group of people who are called such a name, we don't know where they come from, but we know that if they are there, if someone steals your things, you go to them. Then when you find out that that very same person is actually Utsoto, so what are you going to do about that? So it would be nice if our government would do something about our police unit, so that we could really, those people can afford to have some protection, because we need it.
Let me speak on this as we wrap up the section, because guys, we're running short on time, and our final topic is that medium-term budget policy statement. For me, it's super important that communities organize themselves. I've spoken about this on numerous occasions on the show, that any community, it's a three-stage or three-phase process. You first build a sense of unity, get people around you who agree, who share your values, who share your ideas, unite with them. Once you've united with those individuals, organize. Find out who has what skills. Who has a gun license, for example, knows the law around that. Who's competent on leadership? Who's competent on medical, first aid, etc., etc. Who has what skills? Do you have adequate communications with the local police station? Yada, yada, yada. And the third phase, of course, is mobilizing, then setting up a roster of individuals who patrol, in liaison, of course, with private security, SAPS, and the like, in order to drive out the criminals, to squeeze, as we used to say in rugby, in the scrum, to squeeze them out and to remove opportunity from your particular community. Guys, we can do this. Poorer communities, informal settlements, for example, one of the ideas I'm going to take to the streets across this country to push is exactly this. Even poor folks can put together between 50 to 100 Rand a month, 20 to 50 Rand a month, in order to hire guys who can go through some form of security training, and they can form a local beat foot patrol on the ground, who can then, because of the training, link up with private security, who'd be willing to maybe sponsor a vehicle that goes in that part of the world to act as backup or whatever the case may be. Guys, ideas are bountiful, and South Africans should have this sort of ingenuity in order to deal with these criminals who are becoming more free than we are as South Africans. But in any event, guys, let me move us on. And in the last, can I just ask for an extra 5 minutes from my guys? So we have 15 minutes left, just 5 minutes. I know it's already late. I want us to unpack this medium-term budget policy speech, because really, we'll do it in 3 headings: good, bad, ugly. With that being said, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. We're in the last 15 minutes. Do me a solid favor. Hit that like button. We're cooking with grease tonight with me, Usihle Ngobese, aka Big Daddy Liberty, Bheki Mahlobo from ETM Analytics, Economist in that part of the world. Martin from Staden, who of course is from the Institute of Race Relations, and Nolu Maki, who's of course a marketing specialist. Make sure you catch her work, especially if you need marketing services. That is the Friends panel tonight. This is Liberty and Friends. Hit that like button. Guys, the medium-term budget policy statement, it came out, lots of interesting stuff in it. For me, Bheki, I'll begin with you. Debt is the biggest scary number here, albeit the finance minister, Enoch Gorongwana, came out and said, well, you know, we're going to stabilize debt in the next 2 years. Don't worry too much about that. I'm very worried. Let me share this particular article. The write-up, of course, was in News 24. Give me a second, folks. It takes just a second to put this share screen function on. There's that. And where is that little piggy? There it is. Pardon me, the kombucha came back. I think it's on screen. Yes, it is. There it is. The MT BPS in a nutshell. Debt becomes an issue. There's Enoch Gorongwana smiling away there. Rather happy minister he is. But let me just quickly read an excerpt here, which for me was something to mention. Let me cite those numbers of why I think debt is a big problem. The write-up, of course, says government debt has spiraled in recent years from, get this, 577 billion rand, with a B, billion rand in 2007-08 to an expected 4.75 trillion with a T this year. That is a scary amount of debt growth in a short period of time, due to, of course, volatile financial markets, which have pushed interest costs higher. The cost of repaying this debt, Bheki, this is the kicker, will be almost 6 billion rand higher than expected in February. Bheki, open up the spell, as you say in cricket, for us. The good, the bad, the ugly. Your assessment.
Yeah, those 2 lines there, Sishe, are probably the most important thing that I think every South African should consider. I think the great starting point here is to look at what is the medium-term budget policy statement. What it is, essentially, it is an update from the February budget statement, and it is merely doesn't have much of way of major fiscal policy moves, but it's very important to actually update South Africans as to what's happening with the country's debt levels, revenue, expenditure, and what it means for the ordinary South African. And the 2 lines that you put up there, Sisha, is like what happened 10 years ago and what's happening now. 10 years ago, which was also mentioned in that article, debt to GDP in South Africa was sitting at about 25%. Now it's sitting at about 70%. What happened in that 10-year period? Unfortunately, we saw rising expenditure levels because of on the back of government bailing out SOEs, a ballooning public service wage bill that resulted in our debt levels to become higher and higher over time. What does this mean for South Africans? Unfortunately, it meant that our debt servicing costs, especially now, is what we're seeing rising interest rates, that is increasing our debt servicing costs, meaning that the country has less money to spend on education, less money to spend on infrastructure, less money to spend on our policing. And unfortunately, this negatively impacts the ordinary South African. And my key takeaway from here, Sihle, is that South Africa is really paying the price of low economic growth in the country. That is brought by bad policy over the past 10 years. If you're having low growth levels, unfortunately, that negatively impacts government revenues, which are now projected to be sitting about 27% as a proportion of GDP for the next 3 years. Compare that to expenditure, which is going to be projected to be at about above 30% over the next 3 years as well. And the only saving grace that South Africa had was high commodity prices, since our exports are primarily made up of commodities, particularly that of coal. But really and truly, we're paying for low growth environment. South Africa is growing at less than 1%. In fact, if you see levels of growth, it's between the range of 1 to 2%. And that negatively impacts the fiscus. It negatively impacts South African individuals through way of higher taxes in future, as well as that of inflationary effects. For example, when a country has high levels of debt, you start to have these perverse incentive of politicians wanting to print away that debt by printing money. Luckily, South Africa has an independent central bank, but you're going to see these attacks on this institution going forward. So yeah, that's my key takeaway there, Sihle. South Africa is paying the high price of low growth, which is higher debt, low government revenues, high government expenditure, and unfortunately, a lot of people that are paying for that are ordinary South Africans. Oh, sorry, if I may, just one more point there, Sihle. Another important point that was taken from the budget, well, two main important points, was firstly, that the National Treasury will now take on, this was also announced a few months back, will take on a portion of ESKOM's 400 billion debt that will now be on the government's balance sheet. What does that mean? It's also on your balance sheet, because you as a South African individual needs to pay off that debt. You need to pay off the bad decisions of politicians, as well as the bailout of Transnet, Sanral, as well as that of Denel. These are ordinary South Africans through tax revenue paying for the bailouts of these SOE companies because of the way in which politicians are running these SOEs, and that is to the ground. Another thing is the extension to the social grants relief, which is about 10 million South Africans that are receiving the social grant. That's costing about 42 billion. My particular take with the social grant here is not necessarily the social grant itself, but in fact that the country is not growing to absorb a large portion of South Africans. As I mentioned earlier, we have about 12 million South Africans employed in the country. I mean, unemployed under the expanded definition. Here's a scary statistic, right? If you were to ask those South African individuals, those 12 million South African individuals, to stand in a queue 3 meters apart, you would see a line that starts from Cape Town and goes all the way to Cairo in Egypt, passing every single country until it gets to that high point. That is the gravity of South Africa's economic stagnation. And that also negatively impacts our fiscus and also negatively impact your budget as a household.
You know, I listened to that, and yes, in economics, it can be very easy for people just to be reduced to numbers, stats, and percentages. But these are real people we're talking about. This is a young chap desperate for an opportunity, waking up in a shack on a sand dune in Cape Town, or some guy who's in Springbok, Northern Cape, wondering, should I leave my small dorpie to look for opportunity elsewhere? Hapati, you can go down the line about ordinary South Africans, the stories of ordinary South Africans, people who, okay, anyway, let me hold it there, because I can feel myself building a sense of anger as to what politicians are doing to these people. And Martin, that's the issue here. The political elites live lavishly. There's no economic crisis for them. The political elites, especially those who work in these state-owned enterprises, I nearly swore, they mess up perpetually, never learn from the mistakes, what we call the moral hazard in economics, because they get rewarded again with another fat budget and even bailouts. Bheki was talking about it now, and I want to put it on screen for a moment. Actually, no need. Bheki did raise it. About, for instance, ESKOM, government taking on its debt. Let me read that particular section. Government plans to take over up to 2/3 of ESKOM's 400 billion rand debt, but it's still in talks with its lenders about how this debt transfer will work. Treasury is also still waiting for the electricity regulator to decide on ESKOM's tariffs next year, which will be announced in December before it decides to take how much of the debt to take on. Lastly, the transfer of this debt, they cite, will be tied to strict conditions, they say, including the unbundling of ESKOM into 3 entities, what you mentioned earlier on, as if that'll help. But anyway, let's get into this, as well as more stringent management of its cost and addressing bad debts. I'm sorry, Martin. 2 things I want you to chew on as you talk about the MTBPS. Number 1, the political elites fluffing their pillow, even as ordinary South Africans are starving to death right now. And I mean that literally, starving to death. Number 2, these SOEs, man, the moral hazard.
Yeah, look, Bheki mentioned now the public sector wage bill in passing, but that's the elephant in the room that touches on both the political elites and their patronage networks, and on the SOEs, and especially ESKOM, which has the most employees it's ever had and produces the least power it's ever produced. The public sector wage bill, I don't have the exact number, but it represents the biggest proportion of public expenditure. It's not 50% or more, but it's the biggest single thing that the national government, and I think provincial governments as well, and I dare say municipalities as well, that's their biggest single spending item. And as economist July Riots always puts it very nicely, South Africa has a underworked and overpaid public sector, and this is where all this tax money is going to. And as taxpayers, we sit around asking, but why? Who are these people that we are paying this sick amount of money to? What are they doing? What value are they creating for our society and for our economy? And the answer is virtually nothing. Daily Investor, it's an economic analysis website in South Africa, had an article about a month ago about ESKOM specifically, and it showed that its numbers increased very radically in the early 2010s for no reason other than to meet employment equity targets. ESKOM had too many people of the incorrect race, and they had to quickly appoint more people for no reason related to its actual output, but simply to meet its demographic representativity targets. So I mean, and these people are paid a professional, middle class, white collar wage. And we see this throughout the public sector. Now, the Minister of Finance announced that it's only going to be a 3% increase this year as compared to the 10% that the unions are asking for. But even that is insulting. At best, it should be a 3% decrease in the wages of our public sector, and that's not the case. So I think that South Africa is lacking a very important discussion about the public sector wage bill. Because this is what props up this political elite. Remember, the major or a significant portion of ANC voters, specifically ANC voters, come right out of the public sector. This is a jobs for votes program, effectively. The government has created this massive unemployment that Bheki has talked about, 12 million plus. But the government solution is, hey, well, we need to get more votes and we need to get people employed. So let's create, for instance, let's say, for example, a new water agency, and we throw 30,000 posts in there and we pay them out of the general revenue fund. Higher taxes for the rest of us. And that pushes our debt way up. We need to talk about this public sector wage bill. What are we paying for? It's nonsense. We're paying for absolutely nothing. We're actually paying for pain. Because the more state employees there are, the worse it is for us.
It's deeper than this. Because for me, I've never understood the rationale that individuals who believe that the government should do things have. Let me be precise and specific. The same guy who says he can't afford healthcare, right, because it's too expensive, suddenly is able to afford it via paying taxes and the state adding its own little chocho there. And you paying higher for the service via the state. I've never understood that rationale. Whereas you should get the state out of the way, pay less taxes, in fact, in some cases, no taxes, which keeps more of your money in your pockets, whether you're poor or rich, and indeed begin to actually afford these services that you argue are expensive. Pardon me, excuse me, tongue-tied there. You know, Nolu, as we wrap up, because we're out of time, I wanted to grapple with something which Ina Korongwana, the minister, spoke about when it came to e-tolls. Now, I'm going to read very quickly here. Let's get it back on screen. You know, on e-tolls, he says, government will also give SANRAL 23.7 billion for this year to bring the decade-long struggle over e-tolls on Gauteng to an end. So he's announcing supposedly the end of e-tolls by effectively taking on its debt. The system was launched, Gorongwana announced that government will take 70% of SANRAL's debt, 47.1 47 billion rand, pardon me. In other words, you, taxpayer, are going to pay for it. With Gauteng province settling the remaining 30%. Gauteng now will also cover the cost of maintaining the over 201 kilometers of highways that the project was under, the particular project. End of quote. Let me come back here. Nolu, there's something rather insulting about the ANC loudly coming out and saying, look at us. We're great people. We've gotten rid of these e-tolls that you don't like. Forgetting, of course, it's that same ANC government that put those e-tolls in place. There's something just politically dodgy about that.
And that's exactly what I thought when I saw that. And I'm like, but these e-tolls, it was your idea. Why all of a sudden are you pretending to be the savior or the messiah of the people? That one, I don't understand. But then, Sikhe, one of the things when you just done studying, I just want to touch on this quickly. You get shocked as an ordinary Black South African, just as South African, when you see your pay slip, you're like, shoo, tax, is this how much you pay? When you come to adult and be like, I remember showing like, Mama, Dad, like, is this how much you're supposed to pay? All of it, where does it really go to? You then start to see the impact of this, But where am I going with this? You find that even though that's the case, young South Africans, they still do not believe or they don't want to do the shift, because it's not just the old people who are voting for the ANC here. Young South Africans see that right now, tax it's insane. I don't know which job you need to look for that can really give you a lot of money, because when you have a lot of money that you earn, that's where you even get more tax, right? So for me, I just think that young South Africans need to wake up into this and really vote better. And not that I'm saying politicians, they would do a magical change, but the whole idea of taxes is really ridiculous, because there's no solution that the ANC have. They just keep on pumping money and they say they're going to do the debt relief and all of that and all those different things. But Sitla just say that I hope young people, they understand. And as long as ANC is in power, I don't think even our unemployment rate will really go down, because they always create problems, and then say they'll save us from them, which they will never do. So let's vote better.
Absolutely. Guys, we're totally out of time. You'll forgive me. It's always very interesting at the tail end, but it is what it is. I'm going to go around the room. Nolu, let me begin with you. As always, as we do, how do the folks get in touch with you?
Okay, so you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, as well as on Facebook. And on TikTok. But mostly on quite busy on Twitter. Yeah. Thank you.
Your handles, Nolu?
It's Nolu Maki on most of my social media.
Excellent too. Lars Silas, of course, in the comments, coming through with that data. Shout out to Lars Silas, man. Coming through. That's Nolu Maki, of course, marketing guru out in the Battle in the Western Cape. Make sure you get in touch with her, especially if you need those sort of services. Okay, let's see. What do we have? Bheki, how do the folks get in touch with you, brother man?
Hey, brother man, not active in any social media, but you can find me on Twitter. I haven't been active for a while. I've been behind the scenes, but articles that I would write, you'd see them on Business Day. You could also check out HM as well. Check out the website of HM. Check out LinkedIn, mostly on LinkedIn there, where you'd see me post short clips or short writing on what is happening in South Africa as well as in other countries. But yeah, that's where I am.
That is Bheki Mahlobo, Economist over at ETM Analytics. Always great to have him on the show. Martin, last but not least, how do the folks reach you and find your content?
Yeah, thanks, Jingle. Yeah, everyone check my website. That's www.martinvanstaden.com. You'll find all the links to my social media from there, but directly you can go to @Martin_ASFL on Twitter, or Facebook.com/Martin van Staden Liberty. But yeah, as I always say in conclusion on these shows, even though we've been very pessimistic on this show, we're building a movement here. The ANC is on its way out. If we look at the numbers, don't be pessimistic, don't be defeatist. Get together, link up with your communities, support these organizations, support the IRR, irr.org.za, AfriForum, Free Market Foundation, all these organizations. we're gonna get out of this problem. South Africa has faced worse. We're gonna do it. So don't be defeatist. Don't be too pessimistic. We're gonna win.
Absolutely. Sorry, as I have a frog in my throat here. With that being said, that are my guests for the show as I get them off the screen. A big thank you to all of them, and thank you for watching this evening's show. As always, you are definitely a part of the show, and thank you very much for watching the show. Guys, as you're on the way out, do me a favor, hit that like button, and remember, I'll see you tomorrow morning from 7 a.m., as is the case every weekday, for my weekday show, Vuga Nazo, where we analyze the news, and I hope you start your news day every morning on Vuga Nazo from 7 a.m. A reminder, of course, that we now have a website. Find us at www.bigdaddyliberty.com or .co.za. There you'll find all our content and all the goodie stuff. A merch store coming soon. Merchandise. We're cooking some nice stuff in that part of the world. And of course, you can support the show with a donation every month of 100 Rand. Guys, it really does help me hire the folks who help improve the show. Now, that being said, thanks for watching. And as I like to say at the end of every show, never trust a commie.